Games of the past are not games of today. In fact, gaming as a young kid 15 years ago was a lot different than it is gaming as a kid today. I remember playing a lot of Fester's Quest as a kid. Fester's Quest was a horrifyingly hard game to beat. This game did not fuck around. You could even call it one of the worst NES games to ever hit the market. Bad controls, a scary low frame rate, insane difficulty, frustrating map layouts, and a where the hell do I go design. Checked all the boxes. It's easily one of the most blood-boiling games ever to be released, yet I still find it very charming. For my chump kid friends who never held an NES controller, it was quite literally, though, impossible. Fester's Quest was developed by Sunsoft, who had developed a few titles for the system previously, most notably Blaster Master, which was an equally difficult game just in its own right. Fester's Quest had a very short development in 1990 and a rushed end-all be-all deadline, as Sunsoft was forced to put out the game by the end of the year. Probably to capitalize on the very busy winter Christmas season and the shopping spree that always happens in the video game markets come year's end. You've seen the story so many times beforehand. X Development Studio has Y days to complete Z game, and once the final hour comes, what's made is made. But unlike many modern games, Fester's Quest didn't care about if you thought the game was fair or easy enough, or tried to hold your hand through its most difficult hours. There was no tutorial or difficulty ramping or content blockading for the sake of making it easy for you. No concessions were made. Many games during this time followed the same mentality of them just doing whatever they wanted and not really giving you too much in the way of instruction. A few that come to mind just on the Nintendo would be Zelda 2, Ghosts and Ghouls, and of course Ninja Turtles, which was goddamn the hardest game I had ever played. I hate that swimming section with the electricity and them zapping my Ninja Turtles, so annoying. Fast forward today though, and designing a game like this and omitting key features to help players out would threaten any new game with a quick trip to the graveyard. Obvious exceptions do apply, but these games do represent the tiniest minority today. The other game I played a lot while growing up was Final Fantasy. First it was the original on the Nintendo, and then I moved on to Final Fantasy VI on the SNES, or I guess it would be 3 for the American crowd. Final Fantasy VI is quite arguably the best Final Fantasy game to ever be released to many people. I would find it hard to disagree with this statement, but I would have to give that title as well jointly to this game and Final Fantasy IX, one of my other personal favorite games pretty much ever. The original Final Fantasy had a permanent character decision at the start of the game, defined character occupations, and a class update system later on in the game. It was a massive explorative game in the style of Japan's most influential JRPGs and would quickly become one of the most recognizable games ever to be released. And most people would say a pretty challenging game that required a lot of you as well. Final Fantasy VI, which came later on, was a sprawling, phenomenal RPG, probably one of the best of all time. It had a really cryptic and confusing story, a really deep job system, airships, huge amount of side quests, and pretty non-direct gameplay flow. Just like Final Fantasy VII that would follow, you kinda had to talk to people, figure it all out, and most of the time, you'd lose your way. You'd pick up the trail eventually and get back on the right track, all the while just enjoying everything the game had to offer. In fact, you could complete so many side activities that it seemed like so much of the entire game was completely up to you to find. These styles of old games are much different today, and I find it very difficult to kinda go back to where you used to be as a gamer a long time ago. It's not just the style of game or the fact that the JRPG market has kind of diminished as time has gone on. It's just a general feel of how games were made back then, and what was required of you as a player to actively participate with the game. Role-playing games today nearly forbid that you get lost, and make sure to clutter up your screen with markers and quest icons, your inventory with books and charts, your quest screen with a detailed account of do A, then B, then C. It's not a bad thing. In fact, some of these systems are actually really good for games, but they just change the way the games are played, as opposed to how they were played a long time ago. So comparing them apples to apples doesn't really make sense. It's like comparing them apples to bananas. They're just different experiences for different time periods in our lives. And that's because the entire industry has changed so much. Back in the day, simplicity was really hard to strive for because the hardware wouldn't allow it. It wouldn't allow you to put in systems to make games easier for gamers. So we relished in the challenge because that was what we were used to, in the obtuseness and what was required of us to get the job done as gamers, and very difficult games. Playing games as a kid during this time forged us into battle-hardened warriors. Games only gave back to you if you manned up and you beat them. Today, that's probably not the case. Games today give a lot of freebies, don't they? And there's a lot less thinking that goes into playing any given game on average. Perhaps it is not that they are today less complex, but they just make it easier for gamers to experience them. Call it dumbing it down, call it concessions, or just calling it designing games easier. Call it whatever you want. The general trend over the last 20 years has been such, and there is a reason for it. The gaming environment has changed. Today everything seems to be wrapped up in money, and it makes the experiences just different. You can pay for a lot of what you used to have to work for. No longer can you beat the story mode with Ryu in Street Fighter 2 and be rewarded with his alternate costume, or a new colorway for a stage. You gotta pay $5 for it, or spend 50 hours of your time earning enough fight money. Some of the wanderlust has been lost, I would say, but perhaps it was unavoidable? Playing games back in the day meant playing a much smaller pool of games, made by a limited amount of developers. Today, the hyper-competitive nature of game distribution and game development has spread out of control like wildfire. Seeing more and different games being developed every single day spreads out our interests among more games and more game avenues. For each and every game developed today, more players become disseminated across those new products. It's like when Bilbo Baggins says, spreading not enough butter over too much bread. Nobody has enough money for all of them, and ultimately that means today, game sales are harder to swing, especially when so many games out there are free. I believe if we look at the evolution of video games ecologically like this, we can find the answers that we're looking for. Gaming in the 90s was a much more simple time. The community making them was smaller, allowing them to share a bigger piece of the pie. Less handholding was needed, more risk could be taken for more creative projects as they weren't afraid of you running off to another game or another device because there wasn't that many out there. So when you think of it like this and you add it up, some of the allure I think has been lost through the years. Not to say it's worse today, it's just different because much of the fun in games has had to be scaled back, replaced by the assurances garnered by gaming's most conventional safety nets. Steering genres to a place of common ground, teaching players by giving and not requiring, and evolving what we used to know to make it more suitable for gaming's more streamlined palettes today. That's not to say that today is bad. Accessibility can be great, and many games out there have been taken to a place we couldn't even have imagined. But some games and some genres have fallen away, chewed up and spit out the other end, just to make sure they are as convenient as possible to make the most money as possible. As time goes on, games continue and will continue to change through both demand and as a necessity to survive. Games of the past are not games of today. Playing them today isn't the same as playing them years ago, even if you were the same age. It's not just the games that have changed, it's the attitudes that go along with them and what they're willing to do. Today, games are more advanced, and they've gone down new roads. It doesn't make them better or worse, it just makes them different.